Good morning, Monday. A very soggy Monday morning here in Southern California. And as I understand, it's a pretty soggy Monday morning in much of the United States this morning. But anyway, here we are. It's the Ides of March. Beware. Anyway, we are reading The Magick of Aleister Crowley, and we're talking about Aleister Crowley. And we are at the section of the book, right at the very beginning, where I try to answer a few of the frequently asked questions about Aleister Crowley. And like yesterday, we ask, was he a Satanist and a devil worshiper and a black magician, and why did he call himself the Beast 666? But this morning we're going to start off with a question that is still asked an awful lot, and we have to blame Crowley, or at least give him part of the blame for underestimating the depth of stupidity of people. Now, many years ago, I got a Gems from the Equinox, a Llewellyn edition of the Gems of the Equinox. I bought it at this bookstore in like 1974 or something like that. It was even before I was in the OTO, I think, which is 1975. But there's this beautiful sort of occult witchy bookstore in San Pedro at Ports of Call. It's sort of a resort. It's cutesy little place. It's gorgeous. But they had occult books there and candles and things like that. And they had that book, Gems from the Equinox. It was a beautiful Llewellyn edition. And I went, oh boy, I've got to have this. And I borrowed money from a friend just to pay for it. It wasn't all that expensive, but I was that broke. And I took it up to the counter and to pay for it. And the woman looked at it and says, you're really into Crowley. And I said, yeah, I love that old beast. And she says, well, if you like killing babies. And I said, he didn't kill babies. Okay. Oh, yes, he did. Yes, he did. He killed babies on that island. And I said, you mean Sicily? And she said, no, that island near Italy. And I said, okay, just ring me up, please. Okay. And every time you see a pseudo documentary about Crowley put on the Christian television networks and things like that, they always talk about this baby killing thing, and it's part of the QAnon source of well, if Crowley did it, the Democrats must be doing it too, you know. And it all comes back to people's stupidity. But anyway, so I'm going to start with that question. Did he advocate or practice human sacrifices? Crowley clothed many of his teachings in a thin veil of sensational titillation. By doing so, he assured himself that, 1, his works would be understood and appreciated by only the few individuals capable of doing so, and 2, his works would continue to generate interest and be published by and for the benefit of both his friends and his enemies. Isn't that brilliant? Long after his death. So, and this isn't without precedent in history. We wouldn't know hardly anything about the Gnostics if it wasn't for a church founding father, Hippolytus, that wrote an exposition of the Gnostics to condemn them. But his works continued to be published while the Gnostic texts themselves all got burned. But the information survived because of the enemy of Gnosticism. So, not only that, but in Enochian magic, it's unlikely that this much interest in Enochian magic would be happening right now in the 20th and 21st centuries had it not been for Merrick Casaubon that printed The True and Faithful Relation of What Happened for Many Years Between John Dee and Edward Kelly and Some Spirits. That book was to condemn Dee and Kelly, but it's a textbook for Enochian magic. So Crowley wasn't that stupid, okay? He did not, however, I repeat, did not perform or advocate human sacrifice. He was often guilty, however, of the crime of poor judgment. Like all of us, Crowley had many flaws and shortcomings. The greatest of these, in my opinion, was his inability to understand that everyone else in the world was not as educated and clever as he. It's clear, even in his earliest works, that he constantly overestimated the level of sophistication of his readers, and that he took fiendish delight in terrifying those who were either too lazy, too bigoted, or too slow-witted to understand him. Even when it's obvious that he's doing his best to be clear and comprehensible, of his never-ending allusions to classical literature, chemistry, esoteric doctrines, myths, and ancient civilizations send the average student flying to the nearest university library to discover what this man is talking about. It's even more difficult to discover what he is trying to say when he purposefully veils the true meaning of his words, so that only initiates possessed of specific information know what he is really talking about. Such is the case when he wrote about sex magic. First of all, he felt bound by various oaths not to openly reveal certain secrets of sexual magic. Secondly, in the years he was writing on these subjects, one could actually be arrested for writing too explicitly about sexual matters. Medical books were banned. Certain medical books were banned right up into the 20s and 30s. Unfortunately, in part 3 of chapter 12 of Magic, Book 4, Liber ABA, or chapter 12 in Magic and Theory and Practice, if you have it in that volume, where Crowley attempts to discuss theories and techniques of sexual magic, it seems he was not satisfied with being simply subtle. He went out of his way to be scandalously misunderstood. for perhaps a score of initiates on the face of the earth at that time. Chapter 12 was an informative and in places hilarious essay on the theory and practice of sex magic. Among other fool traps, he uses the word blood and death and kill to replace the words semen and ecstasy and ejaculation. So in other words, for blood, read semen. For death, read ecstasy. And for kill, read ejaculation. To the unwary, the entire chapter reads like one big instruction manual on human and animal sacrifice. Big joke. Nobody laughed. He titled the chapter, quote, "Of the Bloody Sacrifice and Matters Cognate." And I'm sure he thought everyone would understand his literary blind when they reached the end of the chapter and read his last sentence. This is what he said in the last sentence. "You were likely to get in trouble over this chapter unless you truly understand its meaning. Unless you truly comprehend its meaning." Then on a footnote to that, and this should teach us not to omit footnotes. In a footnote to that sentence, he said, "There is a traditional saying that whenever an adept seems to have made a straightforward, comprehensible statement, then it is most certain that he means something entirely different. The truth is nevertheless set forth in his words. It is his simplicity that baffles the unworthy. I have chosen the expressions in this chapter in such a way that it's likely to mislead those magicians who allow selfish interests to cloud their intelligence, but to give useful hints to such as are bound by proper oaths to devote their powers to legitimate ends." Unquote. I guess it didn't occur to Crowley that few people would ever read his assuring comments, because the average reader was scared to death by the 7th paragraph of the text. And here's what it said. "For the highest spiritual working, one must accordingly choose that victim which contains the greatest and purest force. A male child of perfect innocence and high intelligence is the most satisfactory, suitable victim." And a footnote to that. "It appears from the magical records of Frater Perdurabo that he made this particular sacrifice on average about 150 times every year between 1912 and 1928. Unquote. Now, it should be obvious to anyone who carefully reads the chapter and its footnotes that the only thing to which Crowley was confessing was a great many ejaculations that did not result in the birth of a child. However, in 1923, when he wrote the above confession, such candor in print could not be published. Ironically, talk of human sacrifice and other shocking subjects could. Martha Kunzel, a Crowley disciple and a high-ranking member of the German OTO, saw trouble coming and was understandably concerned that this statement would be misunderstood. She insisted to Crowley that the following, quote, "initiated interpretation," unquote, of his outrageous statement should be added, quote, "for the sake of the younger brethren," unquote. And here's what she insisted, and he added it. It is the sacrifice of one's self spiritually. And the intelligence and innocence of that male child are the perfect understanding of the magician, his one aim, without lust of result. And male he must be, because what he sacrifices is not the material blood, but his creative power. Unquote. Unfortunately, people who were only too happy to believe that Aleister Crowley could personally murder 2,550 babies didn't pay much attention to Kunzel's initiated interpretation. To make matters worse, Crowley thoughtfully reminds us, quote, "The bloody sacrifice, though more dangerous, is more efficacious. And for nearly all purposes, human sacrifice is the best." Unquote. Thank you very much, Mr. Crowley. I'm sure I will not be the last author who will feel obliged to try to explain your twisted sense of humor to his or her readers, colleagues, or mother. So, now we have it. I'm sure if he would have written this nowadays, he would have mentioned pizza parlors. Okay. Did he advocate or perform animal sacrifice is the next question. Crowley did not advocate or perform animal sacrifices for magical or religious purposes. Besides indulging in the hunting escapades of a proper British sportsman and the consummation of live clams and oysters, Crowley confessed to 3 other murderous acts. 1. As a boy, he killed a cat to test the validity of the statement, "A cat has 9 lives." 2. As a young man, while attempting to go native in India, he paid for a goat to be sacrificed at the temple of Shiva. 3. Before dining on frog's legs, while camping in America, he performed a brief passion play before dressing the victim for the skillet. There's your animal sacrifice. Even though there are what appears to be references to the practice in some of the holy books of Thelema, animal sacrifice plays no part whatsoever in the Magick of Aleister Crowley. Next question, was he a drug addict? Crowley's early belief that drugs could not harm the magician possessed of a pure enough will was dashed by the example of his own life. Crowley's struggles with heroin and cocaine addiction are legendary. At various stages of his life, he was most certainly a drug addict. He also bravely overcame his addiction for lengthy periods of time and finally only needed his prescriptions to diminish the effects of severe asthma to extend his life. Next question, was he a homosexual? My answer, so what if he was? I couldn't help that. Actually, Crowley was bisexual. I add, he was omnisexual. I believe that he'd be absolutely thrilled with 21st century attitudes concerning sexuality. Was he a traitor to England or a German spy? Now, when I wrote this, the book, Aleister Crowley, Secret Agent 666, by Spence, had not been published yet, which is, I think, the definitive work and leaves no doubt of Crowley's participation as a British intelligence agent. But at the time I was writing this, it was just sort of common knowledge. Charges that Crowley was a traitor to England and perhaps even a German spy stem from several newspaper editorials he wrote in New York City just prior to America's entry into the war on England's side. We're talking about World War I. It must be remembered that the United States was very close to entering the First World War on Germany's side. America's large German population and other powerful industrial interests were winning the public relations battle in the press. If England was to survive, something had to be done to sway American public opinion to the English cause. Crowley convinced the publisher of a leading English-language German propaganda newspaper that he was a German sympathizer. He was given an editorial position at the paper and began to write the most outrageously bizarre editorials. He equated Kaiser Wilhelm with Parsifal and Jesus Christ. He trumpeted Germany's right to rule the world. He even went so far as to write that Germany had the right to engage in unrestricted submarine warfare against the world's civilian shipping. None of these things, I might add, reflected the German political or military foreign policy at that time. But it didn't matter. Soon, Crowley's insane, bloodthirsty editorials created an anti-German hysteria that eventually swept the United States into the conflict on England's side. His adventures in the Second World War are also interesting. The following clip is taken from my Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot. During World War II, at the request of friend and naval intelligence officer Ian Fleming, Crowley provided Winston Churchill with valuable insights into the superstitions and magical mindset of the leaders of the Third Reich. He also suggested to the Prime Minister, if reports can be believed, that he exploit the enemy's magical paranoia by being photographed as much as possible, giving the two-fingered V for victory gesture. This sign is a version of the magical sign of Apophis and Typhon. That's this one. A powerful symbol of the destruction and annihilation which, according to magical tradition, is capable of defeating the solar energies represented by the swastika. British intelligence agencies will never confirm or deny that Aleister Crowley, or anyone else for that matter, was in service. Throughout his life, he adamantly averred his patriotic loyalty to England, and there is much evidence to suggest that he was, and none to prove that he was not. Finally, is it dangerous to study Aleister Crowley? Aleister Crowley was by no means perfect. He was not good with people, and often alienated those who loved him dearest. His bold explorations of human sexuality and drugs, always meticulously recorded and analyzed, are fascinating to study, but they were never intended to be casually emulated. I've never encountered anyone who knew him that didn't disapprove of some aspect of his character or behavior. But he is dead. For us, only his works remain as a measure of the man. And they are currently more accessible to the general public than at any time during his lifetime. His influence on the modern world of art, literature, religion, and philosophy is now widely acknowledged, even by his most vehement critics. It's my hope that this book may help bring the wonder of his genius to a new generation of seekers and to an even broader audience of students. But is it dangerous for some people to study Aleister Crowley? I guess I have to say yes. For those whose belief in a God of goodness hinges upon the reality of a devil who is equally evil, for the superstitious, the ignorant, the lazy, the immature, the unbalanced, the paranoid, the faint-hearted, for anyone who for any reason cannot or will not take responsibility for their own actions, their own lives, their own souls, for these people, Aleister Crowley is still a very dangerous man. And we'll pick it up tomorrow at the same time for Chapter 1, The Magick of Will. Again, we're reading The Magick of Aleister Crowley, published by Wiser Books. And now, let's get on with our week. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. I hope to see you tomorrow.